The blood on Willow Thorne's trembling hands told a story no words could capture as she stared at the lifeless body of her tormentor. After 3 years of marriage to a monster, her nightmare had ended not with his mercy, but with her desperate act of survival. Colorado Territory, 1876. The remote cabin that had been her prison now felt impossibly quiet. The copper scent of blood mixed with gunpowder hung in the air as Willow struggled to breathe. At 22, she had already lived a lifetime of pain under the cruel hand of Gerald Thorne, a man who'd charmed her father with promises of prosperity only to reveal his true nature once they'd exchanged vows. Willow's voice, once bright with song and laughter, had been silenced by years of brutal treatment. The shame of what she'd endured and what she'd just done burned inside her chest as she mechanically packed her few belongings. She couldn't stay. Not with Gerald's body cooling on the cabin floor. Not with the memory of his final attack branded in her mind. The night air bit at her skin as she slipped into the darkness, her heart pounding with each snap of twigs beneath her boots. The nearest town was 20 miles east, a journey she'd have to make on foot. With Gerald's blood still under her fingernails, Willow disappeared into the wilderness, a ghost of the woman she once had been. Dawn broke over the mountains as Willow stumbled upon a creek. She fell to her knees, plunging her hands into the frigid water, watching as red clouds swirled away from her skin. Her reflection rippled back at her gaunt cheeks, hollow eyes, a scar running along her jawline from the time Gerald had caught her humming while preparing dinner. For 3 days, she traveled east, surviving on berries and stream water, sleeping in brief fits beneath the shelter of pines. Her body ached, but fear pushed her forward. If anyone discovered what she'd done, the gallows awaited. Even if she explained how Gerald had beaten her within inches of her life more times than she could count, who would believe a woman with no voice, no family, and no witness but the mountains themselves? On the 4th day, smoke from chimneys appeared on the horizon. Sweetwater Valley, a growing settlement she'd heard Gerald mention in passing. As she approached the outskirts, Willow paused to smooth her dirt-streaked dress and tuck her tangled hair beneath her bonnet. She needed work, shelter, and anonymity in that order. The town bustled with midday activity as Willow walked down the main street. Women in calico dresses nodded politely as they passed, while men tipped their hats without looking too closely at her face. For that small mercy she was grateful. The bruise around her eye had faded to a sickly yellow, but the split in her lip remained fresh. Willow's gaze caught on a wooden sign swinging from a post. Rutherford Mercantile Help Wanted. Her heart quickened. If she could secure employment, perhaps she could begin to build something resembling a life. The bell above the door jangled as she entered the Mercantile. The shop smelled of coffee, leather, and dried herbs, a pleasant change from the perpetual scent of fear that had filled her nostrils for years. An older woman with steel-gray hair looked up from behind the counter, her keen eyes assessing Willow in one sweeping glance. "Can I help you, miss?" The woman's voice was not unkind, but carried the practicality of someone who had survived frontier life. Willow opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Panic fluttered in her chest as she realized her predicament. She hadn't spoken in nearly 8 months, not since Gerald had threatened to cut out that pretty tongue, if she didn't learn to keep it still. The shopkeeper's expression softened slightly as she observed Willow's distress. "Are you here about the position?" Willow nodded, relief washing through her. "Can you write, child?" Another nod. The woman pushed a pencil and paper across the counter. "Tell me your name and why I should hire you." With trembling fingers, Willow wrote, "Willow Clark, hard worker, can keep accounts, need work urgently." She'd used her maiden name, the first of many lies she would need to tell. The shopkeeper, Martha Rutherford, as she introduced herself, studied the neat handwriting. "You don't speak." Willow touched her throat and shook her head. "Illness or injury?" Martha asked directly. After a moment's hesitation, Willow pointed to her throat, then made a fist and brought it toward her neck, a gesture she hoped conveyed her meaning without revealing too much. Martha's lips thinned. "I see." The words carried understanding beyond Willow's explanation. The position involves stocking shelves, taking inventory, and occasionally helping customers. Not much talking required. Room and board included. There's a small chamber behind the store. $6 a month. It was less than Willow might have earned with her voice intact, but more than she had hoped for. She nodded eagerly. "Start tomorrow at dawn," Martha said, her tone businesslike but not unkind. "And Miss Clark? Everyone in Sweetwater has a past. Best to leave yours behind those mountains." That night, in the small, clean room that was now hers, Willow wept silently. For the first time in years, her tears weren't from pain or fear, but from the overwhelming relief of having found shelter and the faintest glimmer of possibility. The days at Rutherford Mercantile fell into a pattern. Willow rose before dawn, swept the store, arranged displays, and kept the ledgers in perfect order. Her silence, initially a source of curiosity among the townspeople, soon became simply another facet of her identity. Customers learned to bring their lists, point to shelves, or write their needs when Martha wasn't available. 2 months passed. The bruises faded from Willow's skin, though the ones on her soul remained tender to the touch. She gained a few pounds, her dresses no longer hanging quite so loosely from her frame. Sometimes, alone in her room, she would open her mouth and try to coax sound from her throat, but fear locked the words inside. Late summer brought the cattle drives. Cowboys from surrounding ranches filtered into town, bringing dust, dollars, and a rowdiness that both enlivened and unsettled Sweetwater. The mercantile bustled with business as ranch hands stocked up on supplies and small luxuries before the long journey to Kansas. On a sweltering August afternoon, the bell above the door jangled. Willow, arranging bolts of fabric, glanced up to see a man ducking through the doorframe. He straightened to his full height, well over 6 feet, and removed his hat in a fluid motion that spoke of ingrained courtesy. "Afternoon, Miss Martha." His deep voice carried across the store. "Got that order ready for Crescent Moon Ranch?" "Indeed I do, Mr. Blackwood," Martha replied. "Your foreman's list arrived 3 days ago. Miss Clark has everything packaged and ready." The man Blackwood turned his attention to Willow. She felt the weight of his gaze and forced herself to look up, meeting eyes the color of weathered leather. His face was tanned and lined from years under the sun, with a neatly trimmed beard peppered with early gray despite his apparent age of no more than 35. Unlike many cowboys who came through, he carried himself with a quiet dignity rather than swaggering bravado. "Much obliged, miss," he said with a slight nod in her direction. Willow hurried to the storeroom, grateful for the excuse to escape his scrutiny. Something about his calm assessment had made her heart hammer against her ribs, not from fear, which was her usual response to male attention, but from something unfamiliar. She returned with a wooden crate filled with the ranch's order. Coffee, flour, sugar, salt, tobacco, and various sundries. Setting it on the counter, she stepped back, keeping her eyes downcast. "That'll be $18.75, Mr. Blackwood," Martha announced after checking the ledger. The man counted out the money carefully. "Beef prices are holding steady this year. Should be a good drive." He glanced at Willow again. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Blake Blackwood, owner of Crescent Moon Ranch. An owner, not a hired hand." Willow felt Martha's expectant gaze and realized she couldn't avoid the interaction. She managed a small curtsy, then reached for the notepad she kept in her apron pocket. "Miss Clark doesn't speak," Martha explained before Willow could write anything. "But she's the most efficient assistant I've had in 15 years of business." Blake's expression didn't change to the pity or discomfort Willow had come to expect. Instead, he simply nodded. Sometimes the best conversations happen without words. My mother lost her hearing after a fever when I was 12. Taught me that listening goes beyond ears. Willow blinked in surprise at his matter-of-fact acceptance. She wrote quickly on her pad, "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Blackwood." He read her note and smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "Likewise, Miss Clark. I hope Sweetwater is treating you well." After he left with his supplies, Martha watched Willow with a knowing expression. Blake Blackwood's one of the good ones. Built that ranch from nothing after the war. Widowed 5 years back, influenza took his wife and young son in the same week. Willow absorbed this information with unexpected interest. She'd avoided thinking about any man as anything other than a potential threat. But something about Blake Blackwood's gentle manner had slipped past her defenses. As autumn approached, Willow established a life of routine in Sweetwater. Each Sunday, she accompanied Martha to church, sitting quietly in the back pew. She took her meals at the boarding house with the schoolteacher and the telegraph operator. While she still didn't speak, she'd begun communicating more freely through writing and gestures. Blake Blackwood appeared in town every few weeks, always stopping at the Mercantile. He never pressed Willow for conversation but seemed content with her written responses to his polite inquiries. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a particularly beautiful eagle feather he'd found on the range, a book of poetry from his library, a jar of honey from the hives his ranch kept. "Thought you might enjoy this," he said one crisp October day, placing a small carved wooden box on the counter. "My father taught me whittling when I was a boy. Keeps my hands busy during the winter evenings." Willow opened the hinged lid to reveal a delicate music box mechanism. When wound, it played a gentle folk melody that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She hadn't heard music since before her marriage. "Thank you," she wrote, her hand less steady than usual. "It's beautiful, like its new owner," Blake replied softly, then cleared his throat and changed the subject, seemingly embarrassed by his forwardness. That night, Willow wound the music box again and again, letting the sweet melody fill her small room. For the first time in years, she opened her mouth and tried to hum along. Only the faintest whisper of sound emerged, but it was more than she had managed since fleeing her cabin. Winter descended on Sweetwater with icy determination. Snow piled in drifts against buildings, and business at the Mercantile slowed to a trickle. Willow spent her days inventorying stock, mending clothes for extra income, and reading the books Blake occasionally brought her. It was during the worst blizzard of January that Willow's carefully constructed world threatened to collapse. The Mercantile's door burst open, bringing a swirl of snow and a man whose features were obscured by a heavy scarf. When he unwrapped it, Willow's blood turned to ice. Thomas Garrett, one of Gerald's drinking companions who had visited their cabin several times. His eyes widened in recognition. "Well, I'll be damned. Thorne's little wife." Martha looked between them sharply. "You know Miss Clark?" "Clark." Garrett laughed harshly. "This here's Willow Thorne, Gerald Thorne's missus. Though I heard tell Gerald was found dead in his cabin last fall, throat cut while he slept." His gaze hardened as he stared at Willow. "Sheriff up in Pine Ridge would be mighty interested to know where you disappeared to." Willow's legs threatened to give way beneath her. She gripped the counter for support, her vision narrowing to Garrett's sneering face. Martha stepped between them. "I don't know what you're implying, sir, but Miss Clark has been in my employ for 6 months and is a woman of impeccable character." "Character?" Garrett spat. "Ask her what happened to her husband." "Oh wait, she can't tell you, can she?" "Convenient, that muteness." The bell above the door jangled again, and Blake Blackwood's imposing figure filled the doorway, bringing a blast of cold air. He assessed the situation in one glance, noting Willow's terror and Martha's protective stance. "Problem here?" His voice was deceptively mild, but Willow heard the steel beneath. "No problem at all," Garrett replied, his bravado dimming slightly in Blake's presence. "Just recognizing an old acquaintance. Thorne's widow here seems to have found herself a nice little hiding spot." Blake's eyes flickered to Willow, then back to Garrett. "I don't believe I caught your name, friend." "Thomas Garrett. And I ain't your friend." "Mr. Garrett," Blake said evenly, "I suggest you make your purchases and move along. The storm's worsening, and the saloon might be more to your liking than the mercantile." Garrett looked between Blake and Willow, a calculating expression crossing his face. "Just passing through. But I reckon the law might be interested in a woman who runs off right after her husband gets his throat opened." Blake took a step closer to Garrett, his size making the smaller man back up slightly. "That sounds remarkably like unfounded gossip to me. Dangerous thing. Gossip especially when it borders on slander against a respected member of this community." The threat in Blake's words was unmistakable. Garrett's eyes narrowed, but he seemed to think better of pushing further. "No offense meant. Just surprised to see a familiar face." He grabbed a tin of tobacco from the counter, tossed a coin down, and backed toward the door. "Good day to you all." After he left, silence hung heavy in the mercantile. Martha busied herself with straightening already neat shelves, pointedly giving Willow and Blake a moment. "Are you all right?" Blake asked quietly. Willow's hands shook too badly to write. She managed a small nod, though it was clearly a lie. "Would you walk with me? Just to the cafe next door. I think we should talk." Fear clutched at Willow's throat. Would he demand the truth? Would he believe her if she told it? And if he did, would he still look at her with that same warmth? Or would he see her as Garrett did, a murderess in hiding? Martha returned, her practical nature asserting itself. "Go on, Willow. I'll mind the store. And Mr. Blackwood." She fixed him with a stern gaze. "That girl has known enough trouble for several lifetimes. See that you don't add to it." Blake nodded solemnly. "You have my word, Martha." The walk to the cafe was silent, snow crunching beneath their boots. Inside, the warmth and smell of coffee provided little comfort to Willow as Blake guided her to a corner table, away from the few other patrons. After ordering coffee for them both, Blake spoke in a low voice that wouldn't carry. "I won't ask if what he said was true. I don't need to know. But I do need to ask if you're in danger." Willow hesitated, then slowly nodded. "From the law or from men like him?" She held up 2 fingers. "Both." Blake's expression remained steady. "I see." He considered for a moment. "Sweetwater might not be safe for you anymore. Word travels in these parts." Despair washed over Willow. She had found a semblance of peace here, only to have it snatched away. Where could she go now? How far would she need to run? "I have a proposition," Blake continued, his voice even lower. "Crescent Moon is 15 miles outside town. I employ 20 men during calving season, but only keep a core crew of 5 through winter. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, is getting on in years and could use help managing the main house." Willow stared at him, uncomprehending. "I'm offering you a position, Miss Clark, or Thorne, or whatever name you choose. Room, board, and wages more than Martha can afford to pay you. And distance from curious eyes." Her hand trembled as she wrote on her notepad, "Why would you help me?" Blake read her question and sighed deeply. "Because 10 years ago, I watched a man beat his wife unconscious in the street in Denver. When I intervened, she begged me not to hurt him. 3 months later, I read in the newspaper that she'd been found dead, and he'd vanished with their children." He met Willow's gaze directly. "I've regretted every day since that I didn't do more. So I'm asking now, will you let me help you?" Tears blurred Willow's vision as she wrote, You don't know what I've done. No, he agreed. But I've seen what was done to you. That scar on your jaw didn't come from a fall. The way you flinch when someone moves too quickly near you, that's learned behavior. His voice grew softer. And your silence isn't from illness, is it? Willow shook her head slowly, a tear tracking down her cheek. Whatever happened, it's between you and your conscience. My concern is keeping you safe now. He pushed his coffee cup aside. The offer stands. Think about it overnight. I'll return tomorrow for your answer. That night, Willow paced her small room, torn by indecision. Staying in Sweetwater was no longer an option. Garrett would certainly spread word of her presence. But going to Crescent Moon meant placing her trust in Blake Blackwood more completely than she had trusted anyone since her father died. What if Blake's kindness was merely a facade? Gerald had been charming too in the beginning, but something in Blake's steady gaze, in the way he respected her boundaries and never pressed for more than she could give, made her want to believe in him. By morning, her decision was made. She packed her few belongings, wrote a heartfelt letter of gratitude to Martha, and waited for Blake's promised return. He arrived with the first light, driving a sturdy wagon with high sides to block the wind. Martha embraced Willow fiercely, pressing a package into her hands. My mother's recipe book and a jar of blackberry preserves, she whispered. Write to me when you can. And remember, your past is not your future. The journey to Crescent Moon Ranch took nearly 4 hours through snow-covered trails. Blake kept up a gentle monologue, describing landmarks and sharing stories of the land they passed. Willow sat wrapped in thick blankets, watching the wilderness give way to rolling pastures marked by split-rail fences. There she is, Blake said finally, pointing toward a large 2-story house nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered hills. Not as grand as some, but she's weathered 20 years of storms without losing a shingle. The house was indeed sturdy rather than ornate, a practical frontier home built of thick logs with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Smoke curled from 2 stone chimneys, promising warmth within. Behind the main house stood a bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings that comprised the working ranch. As the wagon pulled into the yard, a plump woman with an apron tied around her substantial middle emerged from the house. About time you returned, Mr. Blackwood. Another hour and I'd have sent the boys out looking for you. Mrs. Abernathy, Blake called, helping Willow down from the wagon. May I present Miss Willow Clark, who's agreed to assist you with the household duties. The housekeeper's shrewd eyes took in Willow's slender frame and nervous posture. Well, you're a wisp of a thing, aren't you? Can you cook? Willow nodded. Bake bread? Preserve fruits? Mend clothing? More nods. She doesn't speak, Agatha, Blake explained quietly, but she communicates well enough through writing. Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened marginally. Well, that's no hindrance in a kitchen. My sister's boy was born without hearing, but he's clever with his hands. Come inside, Miss Clark. You must be frozen to the bone. The interior of the ranch house surprised Willow with its warmth and comfort. Though masculine in design, with sturdy furniture and practical appointments, touches of refinement were evident in the well-stocked bookshelf, a piano in the corner of the sitting room, and landscape paintings adorning the walls. Mr. Blackwood's study is there, Mrs. Abernathy pointed as she led Willow through the house. Dining room, kitchen, and pantry at the back. Upstairs are the bedrooms. Yours will be the 3rd door on the right, beside mine. Mr. Blackwood's is at the end of the hall. The men don't come into the main house except for Sunday dinner, so you needn't worry about encountering strangers. Willow's room was larger than her quarters at the Mercantile, with a real bed instead of a pallet, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small desk beneath the window that overlooked the eastern pastures. Simple cotton curtains framed the glass, and a colorful quilt covered the bed. Rest a bit before supper, Mrs. Abernathy suggested. Kitchen work starts at dawn tomorrow. Left alone, Willow sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the quilt's intricate stitching. For the first time since fleeing her cabin, she felt something dangerous stirring in her chest. Hope. The following weeks established a new rhythm to Willow's days. She rose before sunrise to help Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. Mornings were spent cleaning, afternoons devoted to baking and preparing the evening meal. The physical work was demanding but satisfying, leaving little time for dark thoughts. Blake was often absent, riding out at first light to check on cattle or inspect fences with his men. When he was present, he maintained a respectful distance, never entering the kitchen when Willow was working alone, never appearing in the hallway when she moved between rooms. She realized he was deliberately ensuring she never felt trapped or cornered, a consideration that brought unexpected tears to her eyes when she recognized it. January gave way to February, and with it came calving season. The ranch hands worked around the clock, sometimes bringing newborn calves into the barn when they were too weak to survive the cold. Willow found herself venturing out more, carrying coffee and food to the exhausted men. One bitter night, she found Blake in the barn, his coat spread over a struggling newborn calf while he rubbed life into its spindly limbs. His hands, so large and capable, moved with surprising gentleness over the tiny creature. "Come on, little one," he murmured, unaware of Willow's presence. "Your mama's waiting for you. Just need to get you warm." The calf gave a weak bleat, its head lifting slightly. Blake smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed his features from handsome to beautiful. "That's it. Fighting spirit." Willow must have made some small sound, for Blake looked up, surprise flashing across his face. "Miss Clark, is everything all right?" She nodded, gesturing to the basket she carried. Mrs. Abernathy had sent hot coffee and sandwiches for the men working the night shift. "You're a godsend," Blake said, his smile returning as he accepted the coffee she poured from a thermos. "We've delivered 17 calves today. This little fellow was the last, and the most stubborn." Willow knelt beside him, reaching out hesitantly to touch the calf's damp nose. The animal snuffled against her fingers, its large eyes regarding her with innocent curiosity. "He likes you," Blake observed. "Animals always know good souls when they meet them." Their eyes met over the calf's head, and something passed between them, a current of understanding that needed no words. Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked away first, busying herself with distributing the remaining food to the ranch hands at the far end of the barn. As February turned to March, the snow began to melt, revealing patches of mud and early green shoots. Willow found herself watching for Blake each day, a flutter of anticipation in her stomach when his tall figure appeared in the doorway for meals. They developed a comfortable routine. She would leave notes for him about household matters, and he would respond in kind, often adding a quote from a book he thought she might enjoy or an observation about the changing landscape. One evening, as spring's approach softened the air, Willow was gathering eggs from the henhouse when she heard the piano being played. The sound drew her toward the house, eggs forgotten in her basket. Through the window, she could see Blake seated at the instrument, his large frame looking almost incongruous at the delicate keyboard. Yet his fingers moved with surprising grace, coaxing a melancholy melody from the strings. She must have made some movement that caught his attention, for he looked up suddenly, his hands stilling on the keys. After a moment's hesitation, he gestured for her to enter. "My mother insisted I learn," he explained as Willow approached cautiously. "Said music civilizes the soul. I was a reluctant student, but now I'm grateful. Helps quiet the mind on difficult days." Willow set her basket on a side table and pointed to the piano, then to herself, raising her eyebrows in question. "Do you play?" Blake asked. She nodded, memories washing over her, her mother teaching her simple tunes, later taking lessons from the church organist in her hometown. Before Gerald forbade it, claiming the noise gave him headaches. "Please," Blake said, moving to make room on the bench. "I'd be honored to hear you." Willow hesitated. It had been so long years since her fingers had touched ivory keys. Would she remember? And more importantly, could she do this intimate thing, sit beside this man and create something beautiful, when so much ugliness lived inside her memories? Blake seemed to sense her conflict. "No pressure, Miss Clark. The invitation stands whenever you might feel ready." His understanding, as always, loosened something tight in her chest. Slowly, Willow took a seat beside him, careful to leave space between them on the bench. She placed her hands on the keys, surprised at how familiar they felt beneath her fingers. After a moment's thought, she began to play a simple folk melody her mother had taught her, Barbara Allen. The notes came haltingly at first, her fingers stiff with disuse. But as the familiar pattern emerged, muscle memory took over. The sweet, sad tune filled the room, and Willow closed her eyes, letting the music speak for her in ways words couldn't. When she finished, silence settled over them both. Willow opened her eyes to find Blake watching her with an expression that made her breath catch wonder mixed with something deeper, more complicated. "That was beautiful," he said simply. Impulsively, Willow reached for her ever-present notepad and wrote, "Play with me?" Blake's smile could have lit the darkening room. "I know a few duets, if you're willing to tolerate my clumsiness beside your grace." That evening marked a turning point. Music became their shared language, more expressive than written notes could ever be. Several evenings a week, after supper was cleared away, they would sit at the piano together, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they played duets that ranged from church hymns to lively dancing tunes. Mrs. Abernathy watched their growing closeness with knowing eyes but kept her observations to herself. The ranch hands, too, noticed how their boss's step seemed lighter, his smiles more frequent. Only when Willow was nearby, however, did the full transformation become apparent. Blake Blackwood became younger, less weathered by sorrow, in her presence. April brought warming days and fields erupting with wildflowers. Willow began taking her mending outside to a bench beneath an old cottonwood tree, soaking in the sunshine after the long winter. It was there that Blake found her one afternoon, his expression unusually serious. "Miss Clark," he began, then corrected himself. "Willow. May I speak with you?" She nodded, setting aside her sewing. "I received word today that Thomas Garrett was in Sweetwater again, asking questions about you. Martha sent warning via the mail coach." Cold fear sliced through Willow's momentary contentment. She reached for her notepad with trembling fingers. "What did he say?" "He's telling anyone who'll listen that you killed your husband. Says the sheriff in Pine Ridge is offering a reward for information." Willow closed her eyes, feeling the ground shift beneath her. She'd known this day might come, had prepared herself for flight. But now that it was here, she found herself desperate to stay, not just for safety, but for the life she'd begun to build, for the man sitting beside her. When she opened her eyes, Blake was watching her steadily. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that your answer won't change my determination to protect you." She waited, heart hammering. "Did you kill Gerald Thorne?" The direct question, spoken without judgment or accusation, pierced through years of silence. Willow stared at Blake, seeing only honest inquiry in his eyes. Slowly, deliberately, she nodded. Blake exhaled slowly. "Was it in self-defense?" Another nod, more emphatic. "I suspected as much." His voice remained calm. "Now, here's what we're going to do. You're going to stay right here on Crescent Moon. I'm riding to Pine Ridge tomorrow to speak with the sheriff directly." Panic flooded Willow's face. She scribbled frantically, And oh, too dangerous. He won't believe you. He'll believe evidence, Blake said firmly. And I aim to gather some. This Garrett fellow, was he a friend of your husband's? Willow wrote quickly, drinking companion, sometimes watched while Gerald. Her hand faltered. Blake's jaw tightened as he read between the lines. I see. Then Garrett is no disinterested witness. What happened the night your husband died, Willow? The full truth might help us build your defense. For a long moment, Willow stared at the blank page before her. Then, slowly, painfully, she began to write. The words poured out 3 years of progressive cruelty, culminating in a night when Gerald, drunk and enraged over a spilled cup, had beaten her unconscious, then awakened her with a knife at her throat, promising to finish what he'd started. The desperate struggle. The blade turned against him. The blood. When she finished, tears had soaked the paper, blurring some of the words. She couldn't look at Blake, couldn't bear to see disgust or horror in his eyes. A gentle hand covered hers. Look at me, Willow. She raised her gaze reluctantly. You survived, Blake said simply. You did what was necessary to live. No court in this territory would convict you if they knew the truth. How can you be sure? She wrote. Because I'll make sure they know it. I'm writing to Pine Ridge with this account, along with character references from Martha and myself. I'll speak to the sheriff, show him evidence of your husband's character. Blake's expression hardened. And if Garrett is there, I'll ensure he faces questions about his own role in what happened to you. Willow shook her head frantically. The idea of Blake confronting these men, potentially putting himself in danger for her sake, was unbearable. She wrote, Please don't go. We could leave, go further west. Running isn't the answer, Blake said firmly. You've done nothing wrong, Willow. Nothing that requires you to spend your life looking over your shoulder. That night, Willow couldn't sleep. The thought of Blake riding into danger tormented her. What if Gerald had friends in Pine Ridge who would harm Blake? What if the sheriff didn't believe him? What if she lost this good, decent man who had shown her kindness when she'd forgotten such a thing existed? As dawn approached, Willow made a decision. Rising quietly, she dressed and packed a small bundle of essentials. She couldn't allow Blake to risk himself for her. Better to disappear, to draw any pursuit away from Crescent Moon Ranch and the people who had sheltered her. She crept downstairs in the gray pre-dawn light, intending to leave a note of gratitude and apology. As she entered the study to find paper, she was startled by a voice from the shadows. You're leaving. Blake sat in his armchair, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, as if he'd anticipated her actions and kept vigil through the night. Willow froze, then nodded slowly. I can't let you do that, he said, rising to his feet. Not like this. Not alone. She reached for her notepad, but Blake gently took it from her hands. No more notes between us, Willow. Not for this. His voice was soft but firm. I need to hear your voice. I believe it's still there, locked away by fear and pain. But if you're determined to leave to face whatever comes next, you'll need your voice. And I need to hear it just once before you go. Tears filled Willow's eyes. She shook her head, touching her throat in the gesture that had become her explanation. Try, Blake whispered. For yourself, if not for me. The quiet request, spoken without demand or expectation, broke through something calcified inside her. Willow closed her eyes, remembering a time before fear had silenced her, before shame had become her constant companion. She thought of the music they'd shared, of the laughter she'd once known, of the woman she had been before Gerald Thorne had tried to destroy her. Blake. The name emerged as barely a whisper, rough from disuse, but audible in the quiet room. Willow's eyes flew open in shock at the sound of her own voice. Blake's expression transformed wonder and joy, illuminating his features. Again, he encouraged softly. Please. Blake. Stronger this time, though still raspy. I can't let you risk yourself. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his hands coming to rest gently on her shoulders. Do you know why I built this ranch, Willow? Why I worked myself to exhaustion for 15 years to create Crescent Moon? She shook her head. Because after the war, after seeing so much death and destruction, I needed to build something. To create instead of destroy. To leave something good in this world. His voice deepened with emotion. But a ranch isn't just land and cattle. It's people. It's purpose. It's a future. I have no future, Willow whispered, each word painful but necessary. Only a past that won't let me go. That's where you're wrong. Blake's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. The past only defines us if we let it. I've watched you these past months, Willow. I've seen you build a life here, tentative perhaps, but real. You've brought music back to this house. Light, even laughter in your own way. Willow blinked at his words. Laughter. Your eyes, Blake explained. They laugh sometimes even when your voice can't. When you're playing with the barn kittens. When Mrs. Abernathy tells her outrageous stories. When the spring wind catches your hair. His observation stunned her. Had she truly laughed, in any form, after believing that part of herself was dead? Come with me to Pine Ridge, Blake said. Not as a fugitive, but as a woman claiming her right to justice. Tell your story with your own voice. End this chapter so you can begin the next. I'm afraid, Willow admitted, the words scratching her throat. I know. Blake's voice gentled further. But you're also brave. Braver than anyone I've ever known. And you won't be alone. Not ever again, if I have any say in the matter. The meaning behind his words hung in the air between them. Willow searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity in his steady gaze. Why? She asked simply. Why would you do this for me? Blake's hands moved from her shoulders to gently frame her face. Because from the moment you looked up at me in Martha's store, something in me recognized something in you. Because every day since, I've discovered more reasons to admire your strength, your kindness, your resilience. Because I'm a better man when you're near. He paused, his thumbs softly brushing her cheeks. Because I love you, Willow, and I want to build a life with you, a life that needs your laughter to be complete. The declaration, spoken so simply and directly, broke the final barrier around Willow's heart. A sound escaped her half-sob, half-laugh as she raised her hands to cover his. I don't know if I can be whole again, she whispered. You already are, Blake insisted. Wounded, yes. Scarred, certainly. But whole in all the ways that matter. And growing stronger every day. Willow leaned forward until her forehead rested against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. If we go to Pine Ridge, if they believe me, what then? Blake's arms encircled her gently. Then we come home, to Crescent Moon, to our future. If you'll have me. I will, she whispered, the words feeling like a vow. I do. The journey to Pine Ridge took 2 days by wagon. Willow spent the hours practicing her voice, which strengthened with each mile. By the time they approached the mining town nestled in the foothills, she could speak in full sentences, though her voice remained soft and occasionally faltered. Blake had sent a telegram ahead to the sheriff, requesting a meeting on a matter of grave importance. He had also written to a judge he'd known during his brief stint practicing law before the war, a connection he'd kept quiet until now. Sheriff Ellis Donovan was a weathered man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. He listened without interruption as Willow, with Blake beside her, recounted her marriage to Gerald Thorne and the events leading to his death. Her voice broke several times, but she persisted, determined to speak her truth after years of silence. When she finished, the sheriff was quiet for a long moment. "I knew Gerald Thorne," he finally said. "Never did trust him. Had complaints from neighbors about shouting, but no witness ever came forward." He looked directly at Willow. "Why didn't you come to me after it happened, Mrs. Thorne?" "I was afraid," Willow answered honestly. "Afraid no one would believe me. Afraid of what Gerald's friends might do. Afraid of—" She hesitated. "Afraid of the gallows." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Fear makes sense. Running, too, in your situation. But it complicates things." "What happens now?" Blake asked, his hand steady on Willow's shoulder. "Now we take sworn statements. I'll need to verify what I can of Mrs. Thorne's account. Examine the cabin where it happened." The sheriff's expression remained neutral. "And I'll need to question Thomas Garrett about his relationship with the deceased." "Garrett has been spreading lies about Mrs. Thorne," Blake said, his voice hardening. "Pursuing her with what appears to be a personal vendetta." "Garrett's got his own troubles with the law," Sheriff Donovan replied. "Been suspected of cattle rustling across 3 counties. His word won't carry much weight against a respectable witness like yourself, Mr. Blackwood." Relief washed through Willow, though uncertainty remained. "Will there be a trial?" "That's for the district attorney to decide after I complete my investigation. But based on what you've told me and what I knew of Gerald Thorne." The sheriff sighed. "I call it justifiable homicide. Self-defense, pure and simple." 3 days later, Willow stood in the remains of the cabin she'd fled months before. Sheriff Donovan had insisted on bringing her back to verify her account. The small structure was cold and abandoned, dust covering the few pieces of furniture that remained. In the main room, a dark stain on the wooden floor marked where Gerald had fallen. Willow felt Blake's presence behind her, solid and reassuring. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she answered, surprising herself with the truth of it. The cabin held no power over her now. It was simply a place wood and nails and memories that were losing their sharp edges. "I'm ready to leave." The sheriff completed his investigation within a week. With testimony from neighbors who had witnessed Gerald's drunken rages, examination of the evidence at the cabin, and the unexpected statement from the local doctor who had treated Willow's injuries on multiple occasions, the district attorney declined to file charges. "The law recognizes your right to defend yourself, Mrs. Thorne," he explained in his official letter. "This office considers the matter closed. Freedom. Legal, recognized freedom." Willow read the letter again and again, scarcely believing the words. No more looking over her shoulder. No more fear of pursuit. No more hiding. As for Thomas Garrett, the investigation into Willow's case had brought unwanted attention to his own activities. Faced with mounting evidence of cattle theft, he'd fled the territory, last seen heading for the Dakota Territory with a posse in lukewarm pursuit. On a bright May morning, Blake and Willow began the journey back to Crescent Moon Ranch. The wagon rolled along familiar trails, but everything felt different. Willow sat beside Blake on the driver's bench rather than huddled in the back, her face turned to the sun, her voice joining his in conversation that flowed easily between them. "What will you do now?" Blake asked as they crested a hill overlooking the valley where Crescent Moon lay spread before them. "With your future secure, you have choices you didn't have before." Willow considered the question seriously. "First, I'd like to write to Martha, tell her everything that happened. She deserves to know the truth." She paused, gathering courage. "Then, if the offer still stands, I'd like to make a home at Crescent Moon. With you." Blake's hand covered hers on the bench between them. "The offer more than stands, Willow. It's my dearest hope." 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning with wildflowers blanketing the meadows surrounding Crescent Moon, Blake and Willow were married under the old cottonwood tree. The ceremony was small Mrs. Abernathy, the ranch hands, Martha Rutherford who'd made the journey from Sweetwater, and a circuit-riding preacher who pronounced them husband and wife with cheerful efficiency. Do you, Blake Blackwood, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Blake answered, his voice steady and sure. And do you, Willow Clark, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Willow looked up at Blake, at the man who had helped her reclaim her voice, her freedom, and her hope for the future. I do, she said clearly, without hesitation or fear. Their kiss sealed promises spoken and unspoken of patience, of healing, of building something beautiful from the ashes of what had come before. That night, as stars appeared above Crescent Moon Ranch, Blake and Willow sat on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. Happy? He asked simply. In answer, Willow laughed a real laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her. Rusty from disuse but genuine and free. The sound startled them both, then made them smile. Yes, she said, reaching up to touch his face. I'm happy, and I'm home. 5 years later, Crescent Moon Ranch had flourished beyond Blake's original vision. The herd had doubled in size, a new barn stood where the old one had been, and the main house had expanded to accommodate a growing family. Willow stood on the porch, watching as Blake lifted their 3-year-old daughter, Charlotte, onto her first pony. The child's delighted giggle carried across the yard, matched by her father's deeper laugh. Beside them, 5-year-old James solemnly offered advice from atop his own mount, already an accomplished rider at his young age. Not too fast, Papa, Willow called, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their third child grew. Charlotte, remember to hold the reins like I showed you. I've got her, love, Blake assured her with a wink. Just a slow walk around the corral. Willow watched them, her heart full to bursting. The woman who had arrived at Crescent Moon years ago, silent, frightened, broken, seemed like someone from another lifetime. Her voice had returned fully, though it would always carry a slight huskiness that Blake claimed he found irresistible. She sang to their children each night, taught piano to James, who showed remarkable talent, and laughed, often a sound that had become as natural to the ranch as the wind in the pines or the lowing of cattle. The nightmares still came, occasionally shadows that might never completely disappear. But they were fewer each year, and Blake was always there when she woke, his steady presence anchoring her to the present, to this life they had built together. Mrs. Abernathy emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Dinner's ready whenever those rascals are done with their riding lesson, she announced. Though why you insist on cooking in your condition, I'll never understand. Willow smiled at the housekeeper who had become like family. The apple pie is my mother's recipe. Some traditions need to be passed down properly. Later, as twilight settled over the ranch and the children slept upstairs, Blake and Willow sat at the piano together, their hands moving in perfect harmony over the keys. The melody, a lullaby Blake had composed for James's birth and expanded with each new child, filled the room with promises of love and safety. I've been thinking, Blake said as the final notes faded. We should host a proper harvest festival this year. Invite folks from town, have dancing and music. Show off your apple pies. Willow raised an eyebrow. Getting social in our old age, Mr. Blackwood? He laughed, pulling her closer on the bench. I just think it's time to share some of our happiness. This ranch, our family, it's become something special. Something worth celebrating. Willow leaned her head against his shoulder, thinking of the journey that had brought them to this moment. From silence to song, from shame to joy, from hiding to a life lived fully in the light. Yes, she agreed, her voice strong and clear. It's definitely something worth celebrating. As if in agreement, the baby kicked beneath her hand another life, another promise, another reason to fill Crescent Moon Ranch with laughter for years to come.